concerned that CBP isn't able to sustain the existing workforce, let alone the mandated floor levels of agents. These are urgent problems that we have to fix. Excuse me. The request also includes a contingency of $79 million for a potential surge of unaccompanied children. While we understand the numbers are lower than last year, and we thank God for that, we look forward to hearing your update on the current estimate of UACs. The request also includes numerous other increases, including $85 million for non-intrusive detection equipment, $44 million for new fencing in Arizona, $79 million for facilities sustainment, and $29 million of electronic visa information system updates. As many of you are aware, our top line numbers were announced yesterday, which will make funding these and many other requested increases very difficult. I look forward to working with you over the next several weeks to prioritize funding to the most needed programs. Lastly, Commissioner, sovereign nations control and manage their borders and sustain the integrity of their immigration systems. These objectives are your duty, and I expect nothing less from you and from the men and women that work with you in CBP. Now let's turn to Ms. Roble-Allard, our distinguished ranking member, for any remarks she may wish to make. Thank you for coming, Mr. Ferrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Commissioner, to our subcommittee. The discretionary budget request for U.S. Customs and Border Protection in fiscal year 2016 is $11.5 billion, an increase of $685.5 million above the fiscal year 2015 level. That's approximately 40% of the total discretionary increase proposed for the department as a whole, and the lion's share of CBP's proposed increase is for the rising costs of personnel. Salaries and benefits, in fact, make up 70% of CBP's total budget request, compared to just over half the budget just 7 years ago. This trend is concerning because it makes it more difficult for you to invest in the kinds of technologies on which border security increasingly depends. On the other hand, CBP has, for a variety of reasons, struggled in hiring new agents and officers, including the 2,000 new CBP officers funded in the FY14 bill. As a result, the numbers of Border Patrol agents and CBP officers are significantly below the required levels. It is also worth noting that a significant portion of CBP operations rely on user fees that have not been adjusted in many cases for more than a decade. Without fee level adjustments to account for rising costs, there is a growing gap between fee collections and the operations they support, which puts an even greater burden on discretionary funding. I'd also like to highlight that in recent years, the department has embraced the concept of risk management. While we can't eliminate risk, we can be strategic about identifying risk and targeting resources accordingly. That approach is certainly inherent in the impressive work of CBP's National Targeting Center, which I visited a few weeks ago. I hope we can help CBP continue to improve on the good work already being done there. CBP also continues to make progress in improving situational awareness at the border and in targeting better the use of technology, personnel, and other resources based on risk. In addition, the Secretary's Southern Border and Approaches campaign is taking the department's border security efforts to a new strategic level, and CBP is, of course, a big factor in that equation. But I think CBP and the department still have a major challenge in communicating to Congress and the public what a secure border looks like, what your plan is for achieving it, and how long it will take. I feel certain that comprehensive immigration reform is in our future, hopefully our near future. But whenever it comes, it will be important to have a better consensus definition of what constitutes border security. I also have some ongoing concerns about the use of force along the border, the treatment and care of unaccompanied children, and ethics and integrity oversight that I will want to discuss with you this morning. So once again, I appreciate your joining us, and I look forward to a productive discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Rover-Allard. All right, Mr. Kerlikowske, we'll recognize you for 5 minutes to sum what the information you've submitted to the committee, and then we'll have a few questions.
Well, thank you, Chairman Carter and Ranking Member Roybal-Allard and the members of the subcommittee. I want to thank the members of the committee for the passage of the spending bill for the remainder of this fiscal year, and it enables us to do a better job to execute the full scope of the very broad mission we have, from providing the means to invest in needed border technology to the flexibility to care for unaccompanied children. When I appeared last year, I'd been commissioner for about 2 weeks. I'm thankful to be here a year later and to share some of the accomplishments that CBP has made, and to highlight how the administration budget will help us move ahead. You know, I've been privileged in this last year to visit dozens of our land, air, and sea ports of entry, our border patrol stations, our forward operating bases, our air and marine units. I've listened carefully to frontline personnel. I've seen the challenges they face and how the resources that the committee has provided have really translated into a more efficient and effective workforce. And I've seen firsthand, most importantly, how committed our employees are to our mission, and I'm proud to represent them at this table. My first year was a combination of profound challenges. Within the first week of being sworn in, I was down in McAllen, Texas, to view firsthand the unprecedented number of unaccompanied children and families crossing the southwest border, I think as all of you have also. And I think since then I've made about 10 more trips to McAllen. In addition to the response at the border, the CBP officers and the Border Patrol agents I saw demonstrated humanity and compassion to those kids. CBP and our partners then launched an awareness campaign in the 3 Central American countries about not only the dangers, but the fact that if you do arrive here, that you will not be allowed to stay. In the event of another surge, we're much better prepared now than we were then, and this budget provides additional resources for the safety of the children and the families in our care. And then we responded not long after that to the Ebola crisis in West Africa. Working closely with the CDC, we set up processes to funnel travelers to from the affected countries to 5 airports where they get enhanced public health screening. During events such as these, we also have the everyday activities that the American people place and their trust in us to keep them safe. We are, as I often remind our people, we are the guardians of the nation's borders. As I stated a year ago, to ensure that trust, we must instill the highest levels of transparency and accountability. We've made progress in this by publishing a use of force policy handbook, establishing a formal incident review process, and transitioning our internal affairs special agents into criminal investigators. That increases our ability to investigate misconduct. The President's budget builds on these accomplishments and provides $13.4 billion to enhance CBP's efforts in the 3 areas. First, the budget enables us to advance our comprehensive border security operations, deploying technology, mobile video systems that many of you have seen, DoD repurposed or Department of Defense repurposed equipment such as aerostats and thermal imaging, and the budget allows us to complete the infrastructure tactical investments that are needed on the Arizona border. It enhances our capabilities for counterterror and transnational crime by assisting CBP in building that counter-network capabilities, and it supports the Secretary's Southern Border and Approaches campaign, which I know all of you are familiar with. And lastly, the budget, the budget continued, our continued efforts to enable lawful trade and travel, and we're grateful for that appropriation. As trade and travel increase and it benefits the economy, we know we have to get the right people in, and we have to get them in safely, we have to get the right cargo in, and we have to move it expeditiously. Budget provides funding for these critical investments in non-intrusive inspection devices and also to help improve travelers' experiences through these innovative business transformation initiatives and the public-private partnership. So thank you for having me today. I look forward to answering your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. We're happy to have you here. I'll remind everybody that even though we're in a closed room for the young lady who's taking the record, we need to be sure and have our microphones on when we talk. Let me start off by talking about the hiring challenges. In 14, Congress appropriated for 2,000 additional CBP officers. Everybody that had asked for that was pretty happy. A lot of the ports of entry had concerns. This brings our total to 23,775. However, CBP currently is 1,302 agents below the funded levels. About 3 questions here that you can answer. How many officers will be on board by the end of this fiscal year? Accounting for the increased attrition, will CBP be able to have all 23,775 officers on by FY16? And what is CBP doing to address the slow rate of hiring of funded positions?
We will fall short by the end of this fiscal year, but I assure you that we've made great progress. And even though only 700 have been hired now, we're really moving much more rapidly to get those people on board. And we appreciate and understand the fact that these are appropriated dollars, that to the American public, when these folks come on board, they get people through more quickly, and it actually, as the research shows, makes money for this country by getting them on board. But 2 things occurred that were particularly problematic, and you well know, Chairman, from our past history, when we lowered our standards of hiring and did not properly vet people, we made mistakes in who got hired. And we paid a price for that, and we're continuing to pay a price for that. So the company that did background screening through their systems had a breach of security. And so everything was shut down for actually a number of months. So that slowed everything down. The second part is that we don't hire anyone without being polygraphed before they get on board. Finding the requisite number of certified federal polygraph examiners has been particularly difficult. We've hired a number of people. We've made sure that we're doing our very best to deploy them and to have people. We have lots of applicants, and we're screening them well through our hiring center, but both of those things. But I would tell you that there's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. We've moved much more rapidly, and even though we've only hired 700, we'll have the deficit for both Border Patrol agents and for our CBPOs will certainly be much less by the end of this fiscal year, and certainly by the end of the calendar year.
Well, that's interesting in the polygraph, especially because we've heard that story from you and others in other hearings places, and a question that I never have been able to understand. But if there's not enough polygraph people available to hire, there are people. For instance, in Texas, the Texas Department of Public Safety has a lot of polygraph operators. It might be you could subcontract with them somehow. I know from personal experience that there's a large number of polygraph officers, Spanish-speaking polygraph officers in the Rio Grande Valley, because they come up in large numbers and train in Austin. And as a young defense lawyer, I learned an important lesson. If you've got a client that although he speaks perfect English, he was raised in a Spanish-speaking family, to get the best results, you need a Spanish-speaking polygraph operator. Because amazingly enough, even though they would tell you they were not translating in their brain, they are, and you'll get an inconclusive. And I had a client that swore up and down he wasn't a thief. He may have said, I might be a murderer, but I'm not a thief. Thought that was an interesting defense to take to a jury, so I talked to the district attorney to let me go in and have him polygraphed, and he came up inconclusive, which was not good for me. And then the operator said, well, we got a bunch of Spanish speaker guys that are up here from the valley. Let them run him in Spanish. And he came out like gangbusters in Spanish, which I got him a much better deal that way.
Your suggestions are ones that I certainly explored because I had polygraph operators certainly when I was the police chief in Seattle. Texas Department of Public Safety has one of the best polygraph programs. And so I explored with the federal certified polygraph examiners why we couldn't contract with or use, and I thought that it would make a great deal of sense. I have run into a real stone wall with that organization that keeps a very close hold. And I know that there are some reasons why that we can't do that because DPS in Texas is not certified in the federal system. But I am continuing to push that issue very strongly because I think there are other ways to skin this cat.
Well, maybe that's something we ought to look into. Mr. Cuellar and I both are very familiar with what you're talking about, so I'll take a look at that issue. Another concern, the Border Patrol is over 850 agents below the mandated 21,370, a floor that's not new. This has been around for a while. So the under-execution of agents is not due to hiring up at a new level, but sustaining the existing workforce. What are we doing to address the hemorrhaging of agents from the Border Patrol? This isn't a new issue. This issue's been around since I've been on this committee, that seems to be a lot of turnover in the Border Patrol, and which brings up a question that came up in the conversation in the last 2 days in my office. I happen to have my deputy chief of staff is a former command sergeant major in the Army. And we had been discussing with some, other than me, some people have been discussing with some Border Patrol people who said that their training, they wish they had better training. The training that they get from the initial training is good, but there's not the continuing training that we have in our professional Army, where literally in the Army, every time you come off a mission, you are retrained for your next mission. It's a whole new training cycle every time you come off. I'm not sure we can get to that kind of level of training proficiency, but there's basically, from what I understand, very little continued training after that initial training to get for entry into the Border Patrol. And that might be something that builds that esprit de corps that would hold our officers in. I don't know, but I want you to think about that. And then whatever thoughts you may have about what we can do for the hemorrhaging of the Border Patrol. And finally, that's over $180 million of appropriated personnel funding. What's been happening with those funds?
So in the Border Patrol, attrition jumped, it doubled. It's about 4.7%. There are a lot of reasons for that. I think that one is that about a year ago, when agents could retire, they could transfer their unused sick leave toward their retirement. And that's no longer in place, so people took advantage of that. They also had the continuing issue of this, as you well know, this Border Patrol Pay Reform Act and the use of additional funds. We're quite pleased, of course, that Congress passed the Border Patrol Pay Reform Act. We're in the process of implementing it. At the same time, Fair Labor Standards monies and AUO money is also having to be changed. So we're in that process. A number of Border Patrol agents who were looking for transfers have moved over to Customs and Border Protection. That's a benefit to us, but it also makes it particularly difficult with the Border Patrol because we need to fill those slots. And of course, our focus was on the appropriated funds. The 180, the amount of money that is not being used for salaries because it is available. So the Border Patrol has used a lot of that money for technology. We'll certainly provide you with the figures. But because we'll also be in the process of advertising, hiring, screening, selecting people, some of that money is being carried forward so that we can continue that hiring process to make sure we get up to speed. We have a lot of good applicants. We have a good system in place now, provided there are no more security breaches. We have a lot more polygraph operators on board. But I don't want to come back to you a year later and say, well, we've gotten everybody hired, but perhaps we hired some people that shouldn't have gotten on board. I'd rather tell you that we're not as far advanced in hiring as we should be, but I don't want to get the wrong people in the place.
I can't disagree with that. I agree with that. But in turn, we can't sit on pots of money in a time when we're scratching literally every penny out of these budgets to make sure that we are giving you everything that you need. I'm a frontline troops guy, okay? I mean, I want to make sure the people that are in harm's way have everything they need, because quite honestly, those of us that sit in the offices have to rely upon them to be out there in the bush. And having had a one-night experience with the Border Patrol, some of that's not a very fun job. So everybody ought to go sit out in the cane for a while and get a good impression of what these guys go through, guys and gals go through. Well, that's something we need to be looking at real closely, because if we're not going to use the money, then we've got to use it for something else.
Yeah.
All right. I guess that's my time. So, Ms. Roble-Allard.
Commissioner, CBP was challenged last summer in managing the influx of unaccompanied children across the southwest border. Are you satisfied that CBP is fully prepared to deal with a repeat of last summer's influx, were it to occur, including addressing being able to address the full range of needs of these children? And perhaps even more importantly, are you confident that the Office of Refugee Resettlement is prepared to accept custody of the children within the 72 hours of their apprehension by CBP?
Congresswoman, and certainly I appreciated very much accompanying you on your visit to see that and to go through that. So first, yes, I am fully confident that the Border Patrol has much greater resources, is much more fully prepared to address this issue with contracts in place for health care, for food service, for transportation that can be used, additional processing center that was purchased and equipped. I'm also very grateful and will knock on wood that we are down about 48%, about 17,500 apprehensions this year, or encounters is probably the better term, with unaccompanied accompanied children. So that's down significantly from last year. We watch it very carefully. We have good intelligence through other means, and we're better prepared. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, through the Health and Human Services, has taken this issue on. We worked much more closely with them. Their footprint was certainly not as large as ours, and a lot of what is done through HHS is also done through contracts. So my visibility on all of their preparations is not as clear as for my own, but I'm much more confident that they are in a better position now, having experienced what we all did last year than today.
And what do you attribute to those lower numbers?
I think everybody's kind of, would be a mistake to pat ourselves on the back for those lower numbers, because we don't know what the future will bring. I think the aggressive campaign that the Department of State, that we did with the Department of State, from bus placards to overhead signs to social media, saying that one, it's dangerous, and two, if you do arrive here illegally, you will be detained and you will not be allowed to stay, has been a powerful message. And I think that the fact that the president has met with those three presidents, the vice president has been down there, Secretary Johnson has been full-throated in his discussions with the heads of those countries also. And quite frankly, the government of Mexico is doing a remarkable job on their border with Guatemala to reduce the problem of people coming on the train.
Okay. Speaking of Mexico, I'd like to ask a question about the unaccompanied Mexican children who cross the border. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act requires CBP to make 3 determinations with regards to the unaccompanied Mexican children. First, the child has not been a victim of trafficking. The child does not fear returning to his or her country of origin. And third, the child is able to make an independent decision to return home. If CBP cannot affirmatively make all three of these determinations, the law requires CBP to treat them like unaccompanied children from non-contiguous countries. In other words, they must be transferred to the custody of the Office of Refugee Settlement, and in any case, the child can only return home if they voluntarily withdraw their application for admission. I've been concerned that CBP may have a practice of simply repatriating Mexican kids without the full evaluation and allowing them to make an independent decision as the law requires. What kind of assurance can you give that CBP is fully following the requirements of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act with respect to Mexican children?
The training that the Border Patrol agents receive in the academy includes the training and the requirement that they ask questions whether or not the child is afraid to return back to their home country, and so there's a minimum of those three questions. The follow-up question is there anything else that you want to tell me or that you want to tell me? In addition, we have online training that the Border Patrol agents must take so that they understand the settlement in the Flores versus the Reno case, and also their understanding of the act on protection. And I guess I have two feelings, and I know you've expressed some issues about whether they are the best people to do that, to ask that question. They are the first people that these children encounter. Those questions are asked, and it is a minimal number of children from Mexico that then say, no, I don't want to return, or I'm afraid. We know from the experience of last summer that lots of children went to the Border Patrol agents in uniform and approached them. So there wasn't a fear, there wasn't a concern on their part. In fact, they felt that they would be protected. But would we be willing also to look at other means of further clarifying and asking those questions, perhaps with other individuals? I'd be happy to explore that.
Like with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, would that be a consideration of having them look into this?
It would, and I'd be happy to do that. I think we just have to keep in mind two things. One, the size of those Border Patrol stations, which are pretty busy, and then also what is the capacity of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. But if you'd like, I'd be happy to explore that further.
Are there any records or any evidence that you could point to in terms of to substantiate the fact that Border Patrol is in fact doing? I understand they get the training and everything, but to actually show that these things are taking place?
I'll be happy to provide that, and I think from the unannounced inspections that the Inspector General's office did last year to the Border Patrol stations, those were things that were addressed in how are these kids being treated.
Okay. Am I finished? Okay.
We're going to go in the order that people got here. Mr. Young?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, welcome. I want to just bring up an issue that came up in our subcommittee last week when Director Saldana was here. A quote was given from the president that he gave on February 25th at Florida International University. He was talking about the Border Patrol, ICE agents, and their new directives. And for those who aren't paying attention to the new directives, and they don't follow the policy, that there are going to be consequences to that. And I brought that up to Director Saldana, and her response regarding whether or not it's important to follow the law over the directives, I said the law should be first, and she said that she fundamentally disagreed with that. That was very concerning to me and many members on the committee. What's the priority in your mind, directives or the rule of law?
Well, I think it's much more, for us, it's much more complicated than that. We have a number of attorneys and a number of people that we actually worked with on, that I got to work with on the president's directives. And the advice and the decisions given those directives were that they were within the law. As you know, this is certainly on hold as the Court of Appeals looks at this issue. But for all of the laws that the Border Patrol agents enforce, and for the 500 laws that our Customs and Border Protection officers enforce for many federal agencies, there are a number of directives that go along with them about how to interpret, how to utilize those laws. And so I would tell you that it's always our duty to follow the law, but certainly the directives as they've been explained to me by legal staff were within the law.
We're hearing from, my office is hearing from whistleblowers and folks concerned who work for the Department of Homeland Security, for ICE, for the Border Patrol, about what the president said, and it sounding like a veiled threat in a way, and that they're fearing retribution. Some believe that they have received retribution. And I just want to make sure that you stand up for them, and those that see the rule of law as number one, that you look out for them. So thank you for commenting on that. I was down on the border. It was eye-opening. It was a very good education for not only myself, but I think anybody who's going to make decisions up here regarding the border and Homeland Security. The aerostats that I saw, I thought were a great addition for helping. Can you talk about how the aerostats have helped out, what other UAVs you're using? And my understanding is that Chairman McCall went over to Afghanistan and saw those aerostats up in the sky and said, wow, maybe we could use those on the border. I hope you're working with interagency-wise to find some other uses out there that other agencies are using to help with the border. And can you comment on that? The aerostats, how they're doing, if you plan to have more, and how you're working with other agencies to find new technologies.
Well, I think the aerostats have been well received and have been in use, and they're repurposed from the Department of Defense. They're inexpensive, as almost all the technology is, but we have seen success, whether it's in the Rio Grande Valley or certainly in other locations, by using them. The Department of Defense has been a great partner, Northcom, the Joint Task Force, and others in helping us with night vision equipment, thermal imaging, the aerostats. The feedback from the Border Patrol is that the aerostats do two things. One, they really expand situational awareness. We just saw that in McAllen a few months ago with a series of arrests of people smuggling drugs who then decided to engage in a shootout with the Border Patrol. And but that was detected through an aerostat, and I would love to be able to expand that. It is expensive, and we have lots of technology needs because the technology is a game changer. The UAS, I believe, is particularly helpful and important because they provide that situational awareness, the VADR, the radar systems, and again, the imaging, the fact that they can be up to 12 hours at a time is helpful.
And of course, while we are watching from the eye in the sky, there are things going on underground. And can you talk a little bit about the technologies there that you're using? And there's some pretty sophisticated networks underground there that they're using to come into the homeland underground.
Yeah, and I think that's actually the weakest area of technology that we have, is the ability to detect tunnels. We have worked with DARPA, we have worked with other organizations to find some level of tunnel detection. Now, the vast majority of the tunnels are Arizona and California, and mostly used for smuggling drugs. But we continue to struggle with what are the electronic systems that could help us identify where the tunnels are. Right now, it's either human intelligence or a truck falls through a hole in the ground by driving over. And there's probably something more sophisticated out there in that area. I think the motion detectors, the remote video surveillance systems, such as the scope trucks using both infrared and video are all helpful. And a lot of those have been repurposed from DoD.
And then just finally, underground, eye in the sky, on the ground. We were in McAllen, Texas, and we went up and down the Rio Grande River. On the American side, we saw sugarcane, a lot of weeds. What is seen, from my understanding, as an invasive species of sugarcane that doesn't have much use. It seems to me like there's some efforts to want to get rid of that so that we can better watch our homeland. Can you comment on that?
You know, as you have, I've been on the river a number of times and looked at the difficult terrain, particularly when somebody crosses and then enters into those high cane fields, how difficult it is. I actually unaware that cane wasn't a commercial or marketable sugar cane, but I'd be happy to explore that and learn more about that.
Thank you. Thanks for your testimony and being here. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, start off, I want to associate myself again with the chairman's comments on the officers. I think we appropriated this back in 2013, FY 14, and we're still holding. And you seem to equate that if we move faster, then you lower the standards. I don't necessarily equate that if we move faster, you're going to lower the standards. So again, I would ask you, because Laredo has the largest inland port, 12,000 trailers a day, and we really would like to have those move a lot quicker also. Second of all, I want to say that your folks in Laredo have been doing a great job, that I'm hoping we can expand this to other ports of entry, and that's the Pride Initiative. It's a rider that we put in about professionalism. I'm going to be in San Diego, and hopefully we can, those folks over there want it. I think they want it everywhere. Balance between security, but at the same time, without having your men and women treat most of the people as criminals, because they're not criminals. And we're talking about the ports of entry, not the outside the ports on that. So I would ask you to just continue expanding that initiative. Your folks in Laredo have done a great job. Second thing is what the ranking member said. I just want to mention that there is an agreement between the U.S. and Mexico. Before Border Patrol returns one of those unaccompanied kids, they go to the Mexican consulate. The consulate will go through the same questions that Border Patrol asked, and then they return it. So just keep in mind there is an agreement. We'll be happy to provide that to you if you don't have that. The other question, and I have a series of questions, is the fence, and I don't know what your latest numbers are, but when I was on the oversight of Homeland, to put 1 mile of technology would cost about $1 million. To put 1 mile of fencing, it would cost about $7.5 million per mile. So I would ask you if you can update that. I'm not a big supporter of a fence, and if anybody wants a fence, I'll be happy to support a fence around your hometown if you want that. But update those numbers if you can, sir. And the reason I'm asking about that is because I know one of our colleagues in Arizona was complaining, questioning how you spent $730,000 for 60 feet of fencing, which works out to about $12,166.66 per foot to fix a fence. And I think that's just a little bit. And I saw the response that y'all provided, but I think over $12,000 to fix 1 foot of fencing is just a little bit on that. So I would ask you to look at that. And then does your department, I know this has been a question in Texas, does your department also provide breakdowns as to what Border Patrol catches, drugs, et cetera? I know that the locals provide that. I assume the state of Texas has their own numbers, because there's been a question that the state of Texas doesn't break down. They put everything together on this. I'll be happy to provide that information, but if you can follow up on whether you break down what y'all catch, whatever the state does in the state of Texas and whatever the local folks. I know that my brother, who's a border sheriff, knows what he catches, and he knows what DPS does, and he knows what the other folks do, because everybody keeps their own records. Finally, the last thing, Mr. Chairman, I would like to, I think I was talking to Chairman Corbelson on this, but also Mr. Carter, and I don't want to put this out, but the details of the thresholds that every sector has what the U.S. attorneys, if you don't have a copy of that, I think it was provided to the committee, but if you look at the thresholds, every area has a different threshold throughout the southern border, which means if I was a bad guy and I know that the feds are not going to prosecute, I'll go to certain areas and keep it under those thresholds of whether it's cocaine, marijuana, whatever it is. We sometime, Mr. Chairman, we need to go over this particular situation, because then the burden is put on the local prosecutors on that. So I know I gave you a series of questions. You can follow up with some of them. Overall, I appreciate the good work that you're all doing. I'm glad that some of y'all are starting to look at some of the things, but quite honestly, some of us are here longer than some of y'all in your position. So on issues like cane, we live in the cane. We don't just go in and go out. We see that every day. Your response, and I say the department, was to put Spanish wasps to release them, that would take care of it. It was millions of dollars. There are folks on the border, like the Texas Water Conservation, that can do that a lot cheaper. They've been doing this for a long time, that can get rid of that cane. But your folks said no, they wanted to work with USDA and put a Spanish wasp there. That Spanish wasp has not been very successful, because the cane that I've seen and other members have seen, it hasn't worked. And those bad guys are still using that for coverage. So I know I gave you a couple of statements, and if you can follow up on some of them with our office as soon as possible.
And can I respond to a couple things? Thanks. So one, I first very much appreciate the invitation, and it was a great honor to be a part of the bridge ceremony in Laredo. It was a wonderful opportunity to see people coming together in the middle of the bridge. I want to thank you particularly for your personal involvement in the professionalism campaign. So this is a campaign that exists in all of our ports to have our Customs and Border Protection officers, those people in blue uniforms that are, the front line of making sure that people that try to get into the country through the ports, through fraudulent documents, that are wanted on warrants, et cetera, that they're apprehended, that they don't get in. But they're also the first ambassador that somebody sees when they enter the country. And I'm always impressed when I hear someone tell me that when I went to Customs, they said, "Welcome home," or "Welcome back." So it's and this professionalism campaign is very good, and I attend particularly heartening. The fence issue in Arizona was actually a little over 200 feet of fence, and this was washed out through a microburst. And the repair of the fence, $700,000+, was expensive, but there was also the removal of about 150,000 pounds of concrete and other things that actually caused that disruption. So it was both things, and I agree with you. Sometimes the federal government isn't the best place to enlist when you're looking to save money on a particular project. But I didn't find this particularly over the top when I was also informed about how much concrete debris had to be trucked and hauled out of there. And I'll be happy to give you more information on fencing costs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Freelandhausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for 40 years of service in law enforcement, also for having a good sense of humor. I note the hour, and I'm sure we appreciate your being here on time. I was barely here on time. Sort of following along with Mr. Young a little bit, his line of questioning. First of all, Mr. Carter and I serve on Defense Appropriations Committee, and actually I think I know more about the Middle East border than at times I do my own border. As you look at our southern border, and you look at things happening in South America and Central America, we hear some incredible figures about the death rate of killings in Mexico. Some figure of 45,000 people have been killed. The power of the cartels, a lot of activity. We only need a few bad people to get through the process here. And I know part of your statement relates to, capabilities on counterterrorism. What's your take on that part of your responsibility?
Well, I think
I
that-
know you have a working relationship, thank goodness. We're pleased to hear the positive comments about your working relationship with the Department of Defense. What's your take on that aspect of apprehending the people who would do us the most harm?
And I think that we're at about 169,000 apprehensions so far this year, and although that's down from the total numbers last year, that represents around 150 different countries. People often think it's going to be the 3 Central American countries that were most problematic last year and Mexico, but the numbers of apprehensions of people from all over. I think that one of the huge benefits that this Congress has done with the United States Border Patrol is to increase their numbers. Wasn't that many years ago, it was 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 people. Today with 20,000, when someone is apprehended, it gives us the ability to debrief them, to ask questions. So rather than leading 20 people into some level of detention, after apprehension, we could actually sit down and question and debrief them. And I think that is very helpful when it comes to people who would do us harm greater than just entering the country illegally. So I think that that's important. The other key factor, I think, and the ranking member mentioned it, having gone out to the National Targeting Center, and I would certainly welcome, and I think she has expressed that to members of the committee, welcoming you to visit. Our interaction, not just with the Department of Defense through information technology, but the National Counterterrorism Center, other federal agencies is helpful. And then the boots on the ground issue, as I've spoken with the chairman, the boots on the ground issue is that our Border Patrol agents are a part of those communities. They work with local sheriff's departments. Texas Department of Public Safety, Steve McCraw is held in high esteem by me personally, and that relationship is very good.
You subscribe to the notion that a lot of what is happening in South America and Central America, and I know you have certain responsibilities, that a lot of the shakedowns and the activities of cartels, and this is sort of I think certainly open sources, that a lot of that might be fueling some terrorist activities.
I think that there's been a lot of research, and certainly during the time that I served as the President's drug policy advisor and spent a lot of time on some of these issues also, is that we know that the transnational organized crime looks for lines of business, just like any other business, and where they can make a profit. We also know that terrorists need money and they need financing. And the information that terrorist organizations have engaged in illegal activity, everything from smuggling cigarettes to used cars, those types of things are important. And I think that the more emphasis we place on going after the money, the more harm we can do to those organizations. So I think you're right.
And lastly, getting sort of back to Mr. Young's comments, I was surprised, and I know Chairman Carter heard this, in terms of the continent of Africa, the limited ISR. And then I hear that it's also true for your area. I just wondered what assets you're missing in your, I know you have a relationship with the Department of Defense, DARPA, you're using all sorts of technologies, but if you're impoverished, I think it's important for all our committees to sort of know what you need.
Well, I think when I spoke with Mr. Young, I think the tunnel detection technology could be improved, because that's a difficult area.
Well, the technology actually exists. It does exist. You just haven't had it. It hasn't been given to you. Is that correct?
Well, actually, the tunnels that we've been encountering that are much deeper, things like ground sensing radar and things like that, actually haven't been all that successful. So working with our science and technology counterpart at DHS, that would be one area that I would like to do. And of course, the other is that a lot of the technology needs to be updated and refreshed. The aerostats that you mentioned, some had been sitting in a warehouse post-war for 5 or 6 years. That means when it comes out, the technology is old, they need to be updated, et cetera. There's a cost there, but
You've brought it to our attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, welcome to the subcommittee. Thank you for your good work. I'd like to focus today on some of your overseas operations, both with respect to passenger preclearance and cargo screening. Let me start with cargo screening. As you well know, there is a 100% requirement in the law for the scanning of 100% of maritime cargo originating in foreign ports prior to landing, for a variety of reasons, good reasons, I think, from cost to technology to the infrastructure at many harbors and ports. This requirement seems like a distant reality. So recognizing that, last year the Secretary extended a waiver on this requirement by 2 years. Now, I understood and supported this waiver, but I've again been disappointed by the Department's failure to take the longer view and to propose a legitimate alternative to the 100% screening requirement. Last year's committee passed report included language making it clear that the subcommittee did expect CBP and the Department to lead on this issue and to propose alternative requirements that could realistically be achieved within the next 2 years. We also required the Department to propose medium and long-term goals for increasing our scanning capabilities at high-risk foreign ports. So, therefore, these questions. What's the status of meeting these goals? Should we expect the Secretary to again request a waiver to delay implementation of the requirement? What are the technological hurdles that still need to be overcome to ramp up the amount of cargo we screen overseas, just setting aside the 100% figure? To the extent we can and should be ramping overseas screening up, what are the technological hurdles that need to be cleared, and are there diplomatic or other hurdles that we may have underestimated?
So I know that the Secretary has made this a high priority, and I know that his statements have been that it's the law, and that he should do everything possible to move to the 100% scanning. And it certainly involves, as you know, not only a complex set of diplomatic issues. I visited Singapore, where we have 3 people in our advanced screening center over there to work with Singaporean officials. Many of these ports, when I was at the port in Cartagena, many of these ports are also, of course, privately owned. Unlike many ports here in the United States that are operated by some level of government, these are private ports, and so we have to work carefully and closely with those organizations. We're in now 40 countries. We have about 800 people overseas, and that level of working with these counterparts in the large ports in Germany and other places, Amsterdam, is particularly helpful. We right now the screening is risk-based. Who is the operator? Where is this coming from? I think you're familiar with the fact that we have trusted traders that we have vetted carefully, and we have vetted their personnel. Many other countries who have asked for our assistance and in developing those same kinds of programs, where the traders themselves, these shippers, I mean, they want safety and security. They don't want a blemish on their organization either, and they're working very hard to develop some programs. I certainly can't speak for the Secretary on whether or not he will ask for the waiver, but I can also certainly say that many of the barriers and the difficulties of 100% scanning that have been testified to by previous secretaries still exist today, but progress is being made.
Well, what I'm implying in the way I asked the question, I believe, is that this may well be a goal that's not attainable, and that there's going to need to be a thorough reconsideration of the way we do this kind of screening. And you described, and maybe I'm going to ask you now to flesh out just a little bit what you mean by a risk-based approach, which has been the operative approach for these intervening years. What we're looking for, I think, is some indication, some plan of the future development of that approach or any other approaches that, together with whatever overseas screening we are able to do and choose to do, that comprehensively we have a reliable plan going forward. And that's what we've repeatedly asked for. It's not that we're quibbling with these waivers, or at least I'm not. It's a matter of understanding the reason for the waivers, but at the same time asking, short-term and long-term, what kind of larger plan do we have, and what might we expect in the future?
So I couldn't agree with you more that the 100% scanning is would be incredibly difficult, and if somebody had already come up with the plan and the proposal to move forward, I think it would have been well presented to members of Congress. I think the system that's in place now is a very good system, and our National Targeting Center for Cargo is incredibly helpful. When I think of the risk-based, I think, first of all, who is the shipper? If it's a shipper that has subjected themselves to incredible levels of vetting and scrutiny by the United States government about their employees and their processes and their security, they can be trusted, and they can be trusted more. There's still verification. The second part is when we look at the cargo coming in through the National Targeting Center, what is the country of origin? What other countries has the cargo been to or was passing through? What is the manifest? Who is the intended receiver, and et cetera. And, that gives us a huge ability. These new freighters with 15, 16, 17,000 20-foot equivalent containers are pretty amazing. We need to be able to drill down into that information, and I think we're doing a better job. I think America's leadership with other countries on this has been helpful. I'll be with the World Customs Organization. Next week I'll be in Africa on border security issues in Kenya and several other countries. They really look to the United States for policies, programs, training, and equipment that not only make us safer, it makes their country safer.
I expect my time's expired. Let me just say, though, that I understand that this is quite far along and has been developed in a way that does greatly increase the security. We have not, though, ever on this subcommittee gotten the kind of response that we expected and needed to these requests for you to flesh out the plans going forward, and to get past this year-to-year waiver business. There may well have to be waivers into the indefinite future, but there also needs to be some assurance that we are operating in a rational and comprehensive fashion, so that we have a plan, and maybe your practice is better than the kind of reports we've received indicate. I suspect it is in some instances, but I do urge you to take those requests seriously. I expect they will be repeated in this year's bill.
Thank you, Mr. Price, and a good point. Mr. Stewart.
Yeah. Commissioner, thank you. Appreciate your many years of service. One of my favorite things to do is go back to my district and to ride with some of the law enforcement and police officers and see what they do. It's very interesting work, but it's difficult work as well, so thank you for that. You should know that I'm from the West. I represent Utah. I grew up ranching, still have the ranch in my family. I was a military member. The Second Amendment is something that's really quite important to me, as it is for millions of Americans. I'm distressed at times by what I believe is an attempt by this administration to suppress or to make more difficult Second Amendment rights for Americans. And I have a question regarding this, and I'd like to begin with this premise, that you and I would agree that there are sometimes lawful and practical reasons why an American would want to travel overseas, travel internationally with a weapon. Could we agree on that?
Yes.
For example, going on a safari, going to Canada to hunt, whatever that may be. In the past, this was relatively simple, and I've done this. You fill out a form that you're familiar with, a 4457, I guess, as I recall. and you had to enter the serial number, and it was relatively easy to do. But now there's a new protocol, which frankly makes it almost impossible for many Americans without being deceitful, without being dishonest. Because now, under the new CBP and ICE, under the automated export system, you have to enter an EID, an employer identification number, which, maybe you have one. I'd be surprised if you do. Some people do, but most don't. And if you go to the IRS to get an EIN, you have to have a reason, and one of them isn't because I want to travel to Africa on a safari. They're all dealing with, I'm creating a business, I'm hiring an employee, something in a business structure. And I wonder, tell me why. This makes no sense at all, why we would have this new protocol. And it requires people to be dishonest in order to do something that's legal and lawful.
So the chairman brought this up to me when I visited with him last Thursday, and then Senator Hoeven asked me if I would visit with him yesterday on this. Until the chairman brought this up with me, I actually was unaware of the new protocol. I was well aware that if you wanted to travel into Canada, go hunting, you filled out the form, the Customs and Border Protection officer looked at your identification, looked at the firearm to see that it matched, and then you continued on your way.
Could I comment on that quickly? Sure. And that is, if you're unaware, you need to go back to your folks and say, why wasn't I? Because there's been a lot of people who have been working with your agency for a long time now,
right,
trying to raise this issue.
So I think that the part of this about, one, we have a lot of protocols. We enforce laws for 47 different federal agencies, well over 500 laws, including the Department of State. So I would tell you that if I'm not aware of every FDA regulation and every Consumer Product Safety Commission regulation that our people enforce. I will tell you that when the chairman brought this up and I met with Senator Hoeven yesterday, it made no sense to me to continue down this path, and that by this afternoon we would be changing our website and our information, and that for this interim process, and this is through the State Department, for this process we would be continuing to take the Form 4457 that you mentioned.
Great. I'm so glad to hear that, and we'll follow up with you if we could to make sure that we've had relief on this. It's really important to a lot of folks. The second question I have, and I think is ancillary to this, and that is this essentially collects firearm information and creates, although through a back door, a registry of firearms with their identifying numbers on those. Do you keep that information, or is that information destroyed?
I actually don't know on that 4457. I think the history had always been that people, whether they were taking an expensive camera overseas from the United States or a firearm or something else, was that the purpose of having that information is that when you returned, Customs would not say, well, you must have purchased that gun or that camera or that something else overseas, and now you should be declaring it or you should be paying a duty on it. So I understand some of the reasoning behind expensive pieces of equipment, but I will certainly follow up with your office on the records, how long they're kept.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Could we agree that if we as American people wanted to create a national gun registry, that would be appropriately done through Congress in conjunction with the executive? That's a meaningful decision, and that's a congressional prerogative?
I would agree that some type of national gun registry, which I think would be probably incredibly difficult to ever have, having spent a long time on gun issues, is something that would go through Congress.
Okay, and thank you for that. And that being the case, then, you can understand why we would be concerned that if this information is collected and if it's kept and stored and available, again, it's essentially a back doorway to a gun registry, at least a partial gun registry, and why we would be concerned about that. So thank you, Commissioner. Okay. For once again, we'll follow up with you on that and look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. And by the way, the Commissioner's response was very quick when we raised this issue with him last week. And thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your quick response.
Thank you.
Who's next? Mr. Fleshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Commissioner. I want to thank you for your outstanding service. I was reading your your resume, especially in the National Drug Control Policy. I appreciate that very much. And I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Stewart, for raising the issue about the gun registry issue. So just so that I can be abundantly clear with my constituents, as of today, we're getting rid of the EIN and all that other stuff, and we're going back to the way that it was used to be.
So what I would make clear is that by this afternoon, and some of this, of course, is on our website that talks about the EIN, and this provision apparently has been in existence for quite some time. We did not enforce that particular section. So one, we will post the information that we will continue with the process of using the form that that the congressman described, but I will be involved in discussions with the Department of State and others on that provision that requires this because it needs to be reviewed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioner, I'd also like to thank you for the State of the Border briefings your agency has begun providing to this subcommittee. This has been in an effort to keep us updated on your efforts to secure our border. One of the issues that has come up in these briefings is the problem of quote-unquote gotaways, or persons crossing the border illegally who are not apprehended or turned back into Mexico. When we last spoke about this problem, we were not given any kind of estimate as to the number of people who have gotten away from the Border Patrol personnel. Can you please provide us with that information now, as well as an update on your efforts to reduce that number, sir?
So I would certainly tell you that the number of people that are apprehended is a pretty easy number to calculate, whether it's at the border or at a checkpoint or something else. The number of people that actually entered the country that we could see and we were not able to apprehend is certainly a bit more difficult when you're looking at that formula. And then the number of people that a Border Patrol agent spots and then sees them turn back. And then there's always the question of, did they turn back and then re-enter the country of Mexico, or did they turn back and then use some other route to try and get into the country? The one, I think, particularly helpful part of all of that is that those numbers and those observations come from the Border Patrol agents, the kind of the boots on the ground. So I would tell you that we look at a variety of systems to try and figure out and tell people, is the border more secure, which I think certainly it is more secure than in times past. But it's a difficult dynamic, and I'd be happy to follow up with some more detail. But when I was a police chief, people would say, is Seattle a safe city? And I said, well, gee, how do you know? Is it a safe city because we got a lot of police officers, because the crime is lower, because we've made more arrests? What's your definition of a safe city? I think I run into the same problem when somebody says, what's a secure border?
Thank you, sir. I've got one last question. I'd like to inquire about the status of your work to establish a biometric entry-exit program to track foreign nationals entering and leaving the United States, and more importantly, identify individuals who have overstayed their visas and remain in the country illegally. This capability is critical to ensuring our nation's security. What progress specifically is being made to develop an implementation plan for the establishment of this system, and when can the subcommittee expect to see a report on that progress, sir?
So, and I would certainly invite you to visit. We, along with our science and technology part of the Department of Homeland Security, have a mock airport entryway that has been built out in Maryland to try and identify what would be the best biometric. Now, there's lots of ways to leave this country. You can walk out of the country, and you can drive out, et cetera. So if you're a foreign national and you're leaving the country through Canada, Canada provides us that information as that person enters. So that's helpful. But the other part is that when none of our airports were built with an infrastructure in mind designed to have the same type of exit that we have when you come into the country and go through customs. So we have to look at what would be a biometric system. Airlines say that they'd like to have 10 seconds per passenger in order to board a plane. Finding a technology that also can operate within that 10-second time frame is darn hard. And the last thing we want to do is stack up airlines anymore with people waiting to get on a plane, as I think you've all experienced. So we're working closely. The airlines are great partners. There's a lot of new technology, passive iris scanning, facial recognition types of things, and I'd be happy to show you some of that technology and try and figure out how we can do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, I yield back, sir.
Mr. Culberson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, thank you for your service to the country all these many years. You've been a dedicated law enforcement officer and appreciate all the good work you've done. Just ballpark estimates, how many people do you estimate cross the southern border, for example, between San Diego and Brownsville in a month? Just ballpark.
I couldn't even. I mean, I know our numbers of apprehensions on the southern border and the number of people, but the number of people entering the country, we have about 1 million people enter in through our ports of entry a day in this country, and we have lots of data and statistics.
Right, but just a ballpark estimate based on your long experience. What would you estimate every 30 days? How many people cross?
A lot.
Of those that cross, thinking of them as, say, out of every 100 that cross, for example, how many out of every 100, again, just ballpark estimate based on your long experiences, great, I've been on this wonderful subcommittee for years, we've worked together for years on this, I know how dedicated you are to this, but again, just to try to get a handle on it, of every 100 that cross, how many do you think there are actually detected, either visually or in some other way by Border Patrol?
So, I mean, I think that when it comes to illegal crossings, Pew and others have really worked pretty hard to determine or to come up with a number of about 11 million people in the country that are here illegally, and that's over a period of years. I think that the Border Patrol works pretty hard to measure what they call their effectiveness rate in apprehensions. So rather than try and provide you a number, I would tell you that long experience tells me, and having done the Southwest Border Counter-Narcotics Strategy and been the author of 3 of those during the time that I was at ONDCP, that the technological resources and the boots on the ground and the eyes in the air along the Southwest border today are far greater than ever before. And my old friends and colleagues that are sheriffs and police chiefs in El Paso and San Diego and others, many inland cities would be quite happy to have the low crime rate that those cities happen to have.
So out of every 10 that cross, you think the Border Patrol is detecting 3, 4, 5?
I'm really hesitant to give you that number, but I'm also more than willing to have a further discussion and to bring some of the Border Patrol experts with me to sit down with you or your staff.
Of those that are detected, how many actually have an encounter with a Border Patrol official?
The illegal apprehensions that a Border Patrol agent sees and can actually apprehend, they all have a direct encounter with that agent.
Out of 3 out of 10, do you think have an interaction of some kind?
If it's any person that's being detained or been apprehended, unless they escape, and we do have some of that, unless they escape, they do have a direct encounter with a Border Patrol agent. The numbers that they actually would see that then disappear back into Mexico, we see those reports. I see those reports every single day, in which there's been an incursion, which we've apprehended somebody, and 3 others got away.
Yeah, what I'm driving at is if your agents encounter somebody at the border, they have opportunity to either speak to them, touch them, be able to interact with them is what I'm talking about.
You're right.
3, 4 out of 10? that cross?
Again, I'm
Hard to
hesitant
say, yeah.
hesitant to give you that number.
How many do you think are actually taken into custody out of every 10 that cross? 3 out of 10?
Again, I'll probably defer back to that
Okay.
first answer of dodging your question.
Okay. Of those that you apprehend, have you, of those that are apprehended, how many of those that you apprehend are actually taken into custody?
Everyone, that if an agent can put his or her hands or take them into custody, they are brought to, they're detained, they're brought to a border patrol station, which actually has lockup facilities, and then they're eventually transferred to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So they do have hands-on.
100% of the individuals that cross illegally who are actually touched by an agent, apprehended, are processed and taken down to a facility?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever had an agent request for bed space been denied by ICE?
Not that I know of. The working relationship with Director Saldana and Immigration and Customs Enforcement is very good. They run the detention facilities, either themselves or with other personnel. The new detention facility in Dilley, Texas, is I think has bed space for over 2,000 people. So I have not, and I would know, especially on the unaccompanied children, in a report that I get twice a week, I would know that if we ran out of beds, if they ran out of bed space and we didn't have some place to put them. And I haven't heard any complaint at all this year.
So they've been able to handle everybody you've asked them to take?
They take. Everybody that we've asked them to take, they take.
How many of the individuals that are apprehended by the officers at the border are given a what's that form you sign, says I agree to appear later at a...
Notice to appear.
Yeah, NOTAMs. What's that?
Right. Well, so we have notices to appear for people. We actually work through Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to do the notice to appear, but we work with them because, you know, they're protocols. If somebody has a location that they're going to be and they can appear, they can be given that notice to appear. And
When
I don't have that number.
Sure, but I mean, at the time of the
me.
initial apprehension, when the officer picks them up...
They get processed first. So
They get processed first.
You'd get brought to the Border Patrol station. We want all of those biometrics. So we want those fingerprints, we want that photograph, we want that information before a notice to appear would ever be issued.
Okay. And then the individuals that are given the notice to appear, then you've got folks that are given the notice to appear, and others, for example, are taken to be returned to Mexico and other sectors of the border?
They can be returned
In other sectors or in that sector?
or to be. I think one of the goals has been, particularly if it's individuals that have been, and we look at recidivism, has this person entered the country before and been apprehended? We want to return them to some part of Mexico that wasn't the place that they entered into the United States from, so that it's further away, and we believe that disruption is helpful.
Okay, I just want to confirm then, so what you're saying is that if I go talk to any of the sectors up and down the border between Brownsville and San Diego, 100% of the individuals actually touched by an officer on the border are taken into custody?
I would just tell you
Processed.
that they are processed because we need
100%.
and want those biometrics.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we're going to try a quick second round. Well, we're back to the money. Commissioner, once again, we talked about this earlier. Budget 16 budget request is over $850 million higher than the enacted level. Given the limits of the non-defense discretionary spending imposed by the Budget Control Act, it is likely that the request will have to be cut and proposed increases will have to be prioritized. You understand that? We talked about it earlier. What part of the $850 million is a must fund items and which can be delayed? And can you prioritize your funding requests?
So I would tell you that our people, our personnel, even though the technology is incredibly important, funding the personnel that we have and continuing on, because it's a labor-intensive business, that's particularly helpful. The second part is either the technology that needs to be improved upon, particularly at ports of entry, is very important to us. And I would assure you, and certainly assure the committee staff, that as you work through this budget process, we will be happy to prioritize and give you the information. But people and technology.
And that brings up a question we talked about earlier, the fact that we probably are not going to spend the money from last year on, we're not going to reach that 2,000 number that we estimated or we thought were needed, and a lot of people tell me they are. So, yeah, and we talked about those funds, and how, we don't want to build up slush funds. And you said, well, I asked you how that leftover money might be spent, appropriated money, and you said on technology. Okay, well, those are two, and the people first, and I agree with that 100%. People are the priority of law enforcement, period. And technology is important. When you make a budget request to use that money for other things, or is this committee informed, and maybe I'm speaking out of school, maybe they are, that you're making those changes, that you're making requests to spend that money in other ways than people when we bump up against September?
If the money is within, for instance, the Border Patrol, and the Border Patrol is going to spend it on technology that will help in securing the border, I believe that the committee is provided information. I don't think there's a permission system because it's within the Border Patrol's budget. If we wanted to use any of that money to spend on UAS or Air and Marine, that would require a reprogramming, and the committee would not only be informed, but the permission would have to be granted. But last year the Border Patrol spent on those kids about $16 or $17 million on contracts for food and transportation and healthcare stuff. In turn, they purchased, the Border Patrols purchased that better technology, and then we know that we'll still, that the money going forward to hire and screen and pay those polygraph examiners, because we are going to get to the goal of having all of these people on board. We've got great applicants, we've got a lot of young people, we've got a lot of veterans, and we're going to do, I can assure you that I will do, that I'll get them on board.
Well, as you can see, in the good times, we don't have to pinch pennies. But right now, with the system we're operating under, we have internal discussions about this. We had them yesterday, so I mean they go on like forever. But the reality is, you have to play under the rules you're given. That's the way the game has to be played. And a concern that I have more and more is we don't want to wake up and find that we are kind of double paying for things. I'm not saying you need technology, you got a technology column, you got a people column. I don't see any objection to when you bump it up against deadlines, you go to the technology needs that aren't funded. But if we're trying to fund both as an intelligent committee, getting an idea of what our resources are, then information provided to us as to how that money would be spent seems to be a good thing.
Yes, sir.
And maybe that's asking too much, but I would hope it's not, and I would like to know, as you make those changes, where our money's going, so we can better plan for the next round that we have to do this kind of prioritizing. Hopefully life will get better sometime. Second question, something we have had some information flare up on. We've gone to some pre-clearance operations. The one we put in initially at Abu Dhabi, and we signed an upgraded agreement recently with Canada. Can you discuss the department's current negotiations with interested foreign airports and the time frame for new operation locations? How does the department plan to pay for the construction and staffing of new locations? Will there be cost-sharing agreements with foreign entities? And do you expect the U.S. airports to lose CBP officers staffing in the new pre-clearance locations? And finally, how's the newly signed agreement with Canada different from the previous?
So Secretary Johnson has made the pre-clearance issue, because we work in conjunction also with TSA, an important issue. Certainly from security standpoint, I think already in Abu Dhabi, with a year into this, there have been literally hundreds of people in which we have recommended to the airline that they be denied boarding. And because that if they did arrive in the United States, they would not be considered admissible. From a security standpoint, having people never get on that airplane that shouldn't come here is a good thing. From the airline standpoint, they see it as a good thing too, because they don't have to turn around and fill that seat with somebody going back that they're required to do. We have had letters of interest from over 25 airports around the world that believe that pre-clearance would be something that they would like to discuss further. That number is being prioritized downward to those that have the infrastructure, those that are most interested, and where it can be most helpful to the United States. So the pre-clearance issue, I think, is really a great step forward on security. It's also a great step forward that when people land at Dulles or JFK, they don't get in line, they don't clog up the customs line, they just pick up their bag and go. The last thing, and you're aware of this too from the public-private partnerships and the work we're doing with Southwest Airlines and others, that those countries in which we have pre-clearance agreements pay 85% of the salary and benefits of our people that are there. So whether it's in Abu Dhabi or Ireland or Aruba, et cetera, not bad places, I guess, to work, they're being paid, and so we don't supplant anybody. This is over and above.
I'm out of curiosity, be interested in that list of people that have applied, because one of the questions came up from the carriers where we did Abu Dhabi, there weren't a lot of U.S. carriers flying to Abu Dhabi, and my guess was, and I think I'm guessing correctly, that we would quickly hear from European ports and others that would say, put us in that list, and we're interested.
And you'll also quickly hear, and I'm sure many staff have, from the airlines, the large United States airlines, that the places we're discussing with all have American flag carriers.
And that was the big issue. Thank you. Ms. Roble-Allard?
Okay. Before I ask my question, I want to make 2 points. One is that the cost of purchasing technology, it doesn't end there. We also have to factor in the maintenance costs of, for that technology that is purchased, which I understand, particularly if it's older technology that we get from DoD, is often very, very costly.
Yes.
The other point I would like to clarify is with regards to the unaccompanied Mexican children. My question had to do with whether or not CBP is following the requirements of U.S. law to determine when these children should be returned. My colleague Henry Cuellar mentioned the fact that we often work with the Mexican consulate in returning these children. And I just want to point out that I think that's wonderful, but it is not a requirement of the law. It is something that is voluntary. And the question I have goes back to something that I mentioned during my opening statement, and it has to do with the definition of border security. In the simplest possible terms, and with the understanding that the border can be dynamic, can you describe the realistic end state capability that you envision for border security, and how long you expect that it will take to achieve it?
One, I would tell you that going down to the border and spending a lot of time there, it's very helpful to get the feedback from trusted friends and colleagues that I've worked with in law enforcement across that entire southwest border. So whether it was the former chief in Brownsville, or whether it's the sheriff in El Paso or others, they give us a very good, or they give me a very realistic viewpoint of border security. On top of that, we have lots and lots of technology and lots of metrics that the Border Patrol uses to look at what would be a secure border, a border that has low risk, a border in which we use that technology, for instance, to take a look at where people are crossing. I mean, as you well know, there's some very rugged parts of that border, and actually when we look to see if there are footprints or some attempt at tire tracks or discarded clothing or any of those kinds of things, and you realize that if you look at it day after day after day after day, and you don't see any attempt or any information about somebody crossing, that gives the Border Patrol the opportunity to put their resources where it's more useful. I think the general feeling from ranchers and others is that places like San Diego, El Paso, et cetera, that the resources that are there from the Border Patrol have made a significant difference. The concern is in some of the more rural parts, and that's where the technology is, and the fencing. The fencing being, put only in certain locations, all of those things. I would be hesitant to tell you that when do I see a much more secure and safe border now as a result of all of these things, including the support of Congress. But I would be hesitant to tell you that what's going to happen. I mean, when we saw those kids last summer, people said, you've got a real border security issue. I didn't see it as a border security issue. I saw it as a border management issue. I mean, as you know, they came across and looked for someone in a green uniform. It wasn't somebody we were chasing through the cane fields.
Last September, Secretary Johnson delegated to CBP the authority to investigate allegations of criminal misconduct by CBP personnel. Because as you know, there has been frustrations in the past that such allegations have not resulted in serious investigations or consequences. Can you tell us what the status is of transitioning to this new authority, and how do you think the new authority will change the way allegations of criminal misconduct are treated?
Well, I think the criminal misconduct issue has been, as we go back a number of commissioners, and at the time that Customs and Border Protection was actually created, that existing investigators, even though they were experienced and knowledgeable, were transferred to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And therefore, at first, there was absolutely no or very limited internal affairs. Commissioner Basham later was able to get more people, but it had been turned down by other secretaries. So when I went to Secretary Johnson, said when I ran a police department, I had internal affairs, and I could be held very directly accountable for the levels of misconduct and corruption within the Seattle Police Department. Not having that authority and not having those resources was a significant concern to me. He agreed with me and authorized, and we have just now issued certification to well over 100 internal affairs investigators to have criminal law enforcement authority, and we're continuing. And we're very fortunate to have an advisory panel headed by Commissioner Bratton at the NYPD and the former DEA administrator Karen Tandy and a number of others to give us advice on what else we should be doing. I think we'll be moving forward. Certainly the 100 plus that we have now is not going to be adequate for a workforce of 60,000. And as we work through this budget issue, and I know that the corruption issue is important to you, so we work through this budget issue, I would very much like to have some flexibility to be able to use some of our existing personnel in Customs and Border Protection and some of our Border Patrol agents who are knowledgeable, experienced investigators to be able to move them into those anti-corruption misconduct investigating positions.
Okay, also, the FY15 House report directed CPP to provide regular updates on its transition under this new authority. And When can we expect the first of those updates?
I know that, that we had committed to, I think, quarterly updates on how this is progressing, the number of people that we're bringing forward. I think, and I've seen a number of reports that, that are as close to being ready to release and to discuss with your staff as possible. So I'd love to give you that particular date that those things are due. But as I think, and I hope that all of you and your staffs know, that any particular request, particularly when it comes to, I just can't think of a time in which law enforcement is under more scrutiny in this country at every level, that it's important that we keep you informed.
Well, let me just ask one more question, and that has to do with the findings of the evaluation of body-worn cameras by the Border Patrol. Could you just tell us what the current status is of CBP's evaluation of the body-worn cameras, and how the evaluation is going, and when do you anticipate it to be completed?
So we purchased a number of body-worn cameras and then took them to New Mexico to the training center and let people going through Border Patrol training try them out and experience them, and then to actually see what works and what doesn't work. The second phase that we're in now is to move them to the field. Unlike a city police department, the environment that the Border Patrol agents work in is pretty rugged. So whether it's International Falls in Minnesota, or Blaine in Washington State, or Arizona, or the Rio Grande Valley, these cameras have to have a level of technology that can be used in those, you know, really difficult environments. They're being tested in the field right now in these different locations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roller-Allen. You know, just a quick aside comment. On these body cameras, which I understand why the public is wanting them and looking at them, but from a standpoint of criminal justice system, it's going to create a chain of evidence situation that's going to be extremely expensive, because it is, once that camera turns on, that's evidence that's available to the defense and the prosecution as to what happened at the scene of an incident. The denying of that information to a defense attorney could probably end up in a reversal of a case. So therefore, that's going to have to be kept in the same chain of evidence that all evidence that's accumulated by any officer. If you put a camera on every police officer, every border patrolman, everybody that enforces the law in the United States, it's going to be a gigantic volume film library. Even digitalized, it's going to be extremely expensive. We're talking trillions of potential dollars in the United States every year. So I don't think anybody's talking about that, but some of us that have to sit through that chain of evidence testimony in the courtroom know that is going to come down the line. And I think as we think about all this, and I know the good we're trying to do, realize how much, under our particular set of criminal laws and how we operate, it's going to be a big accumulation of information that's going to have to be stored someplace. I just want to, nobody's been talking about that, but I've meant to mention that to lots of people because it's going to be very costly to store that. Mr. Culberson.
You're bringing it up at the right time, Mr. Chairman. This, the CJS subcommittee that I got the privilege of chairing, the White House has already asked about body cameras, and we're getting requests from, of course, all over the country for body cameras. And I asked the White House if they would to make the request in the form of let state law control, you know, when, where, how it's used, and how the data is stored, and that the federal government will only be responsible for paying for the equipment itself and not the storage for the exact problem you just mentioned, because the cost, I can't even imagine how much data and how many servers and how much that cost is going to be, just incalculable. And they agreed to do so, which I appreciate. So you'll shortly be seeing I imagine a press release from the White House saying that they've asked to create a body camera program that will follow those guidelines that I asked them to do, and I appreciate that very much. The Department of Justice would follow our recommendation, and that is that, again, the state law controls, so it'll be when you're in a state district judge or state authorities, the state legislature, in fact, in Texas right now is designing standards for when, where, and how those body cameras are to be used and how the data is going to be handled. But the federal money will only go to actually buy the camera and not the data storage, not the service itself, because otherwise it'll just eat us up, and it'll be in the form of a pilot program. But state law will control when it comes to those state officers. Now, of course, federal agents, obviously, that'll be under federal, that'll be our responsibility at the federal level, but that, as tight as money is, that is going to eat us up, cost of those servers and the data storage and who gets access. But if I could very quickly, Commissioner, to follow up on the questions asked earlier, and I thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to, in my experience, I know in the judge's experience, I'm not aware of it, that 100% of the people intercepted by Border Patrol agents are processed. I'm looking forward to going out of the border and confirming that now you've changed that. So 100% of the people stopped by the Border Patrol, touched by an officer, are taken down to be processed. If that's the case, then those 100% that are taken down to be processed, when they're processed, what happens to them out of every 10?
So they're processed as far as the biometrics, so fingerprints, photographs.
100% of them are fingerprinted,
When they get-
10 printed.
Yeah, when they're 10 printed, when they get apprehended and placed into custody and brought to that Border Patrol station.
Okay.
All of those biometrics, so that, history, any identification, debriefing, we want to know who was the smuggler involved. I mean, sometimes they're more than willing to tell us. How did you get into the country? Those kinds of questions are asked, along with that biometric, facial, et cetera. Then the decision is made as to whether or not they'll be given that notice to appear, working in conjunction with ICE, or whether they'll be detained or whether they'll be sent back home.
And out of every 10, what percentage are just 3 out of 10 sent back, 4 out of 10 returned?
They go to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. After that, Immigration and Customs Enforcement would be the party that would provide that information.
So, I mean, just out of curiosity, I'm just trying to, at a ballpark
Right.
figure, I'm not asking you to, for hard and fast, but just based on your own experience and interaction with the agency, with the officers and the sector chiefs, as you were just discussing, what, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 are sent back in another sector?
When we return them back to Mexico, as we've discussed, when we return them back to Mexico, we attempt to turn them back at some place other than the place
Right.
where they crossed.
What percentage are returned?
And I don't know that percentage. I don't.
What percentage are sent to ICE?
We work with ICE, whether it's through a notice to appear or whether it's to be remanded to custody at an ICE detention facility. So ICE is the keeper of the detention facility after we process them. So that's what happens.
I appreciate your dilemma. You're a professional. You've served this country very, very well for many, many years. I understand your dilemma. It's just something we've each got to personally bird dog, Mr. Chairman, down on the border.
Thanks.
Mr. Price, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, the chairman raised a number of questions I intended to raise about the pre-clearance operations for passengers at overseas airports. Let me just ask you, though, to the extent you can, in an unclassified session, reflect on the security aspects of this. The most obvious measurement is the one you hinted at, the number of people apprehended who wouldn't be admissible. Is that a factor at other airports besides Abu Dhabi? To what extent has that been an experience more widely? Of course, the other pre-clearance points are in very diverse areas. And what else would you say about the security aspect of this?
And I would, we've had pre-clearance in Canada for many, many years and in other places. Those countries, I need to make sure, because I received this note, I need to make sure they don't pay 85% of the salary and benefits. It's only the new ones coming online, for example, Abu Dhabi. And any new pre-clearance agreement, they would continue to pay. So I think that the dual security issue that's most helpful about pre-clearance is, one, there's a TSA representative also at that location. And so that person getting ready to board that flight goes through a TSA-like screening or analogous screening to what they would do if they were boarding a flight in the United States. The second thing is then they go through the customs system in the United States, even though they're overseas. That information is run against a variety of databases that would lead to us making a determination as to whether or not we should tell that airline that if that person was to arrive in the United States, that they would not be deemed admissible. The airline then has to make a decision, of course, as to whether or not to board them. I think that is an incredibly effective screening. It's pushing the borders out.
And it also relieves the enforcement and probably the congestion burden at the U.S. end, to the extent these problems are caught early and don't become a problem then at our border.
And when the person arrives, of course, they pick up their luggage and go, just as if they were on a domestic airline. You know, the biggest complaint lately has been that people are waiting. They've already cleared customs. They're waiting too long to get their baggage, but that's an airline issue.
Let me ask you to reflect on the sequestration experience and the ways we might avoid repeating that. We're dealing in appropriations subcommittees, all of them, with a degree of uncertainty this year as to what our ultimate allocation levels are going to be. We're initially, unfortunately, constrained to mark up to sequestration levels. That affects this subcommittee less than some others, given the allocations approved by the committee yesterday. But nonetheless, it is constraining. And then we can hope for a budget agreement that prevents sequestration coming into effect. So it's uncertain at what level or you might have to deal with this, at what point and to what degree you might have to deal with this. But I know it was a problem before for CBP with planning for more than $700 million in reductions, reducing travel, training expenses, facilities upkeep, and so on, anticipating furloughs. So we hope to avoid this. On the other hand, we're still talking about funding levels that are keyed to the unfortunate realities of the Budget Control Act and the fact that as a sign of the failure to address the real drivers of the deficit, namely tax expenditures and mandatory spending. As a result of that failure, we are dealing with repeated reductions in appropriated spending and the reality of sequestration one way or another. Either we encounter the direct reality or we bake it into our appropriations numbers. Anyway, I wonder if you could reflect on that and what kind of preparations, contingency planning it requires you to undertake at this point.
A couple of, when I came into this job, I certainly, and during the confirmation process, I knew the issues around security pretty well. Of course, you know that we're the second largest revenue collector for the United States government after the IRS. And we have this huge economic footprint for trade and travel. Repeatedly, all of the groups that have talked to me from the private sector said the one thing that we really need from CBP is consistency and predictability. And of course, we need that when it comes to a budget also. Some of our budget folks are sitting in the back. The amount of time and effort that is spent in preparing directives and memorandums and contingency planning for whether or not we'll have a shutdown to whether or not we're going to have adequate resources is a huge amount of time, and and I think that creates some difficulties for us. You know, I've lived being a police chief with city councils and mayors, and this is the budget. This is how you need to work within the chief financial constraints of that particular city. But it's that lack of predictability and understanding that, one, costs us a lot of time and planning, and two, makes our relationship with the people that drive the economy of this nation, the private sector businesses, it makes our relationship a bit more difficult. We have a federally advised committee, a federally approved advisory committee, some of the largest companies in the United States, and I meet with them 4 times a year, and I'll have breakfast with them tomorrow. So traders, shippers, importers, exporters, on and on and on. These are important issues to them, and they're important issues, and I know they're important issues to certainly the members of this subcommittee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, we're about to the last hour. I know that Lucille has one additional question she'll ask, and I'll recognize her for it.
As I mentioned earlier, I was able to visit CBP's National Targeting Center a few weeks ago, where I had a very good briefing with the Deputy Commissioner and the NTC staff. And I just want you to know that I was very, very impressed by what I saw and by NTC's capability to manage risk in both the passenger and the cargo environments. Related to the NTC, we provided $4.5 million in the FY15 bill to help CBP establish a counter-network operation capability. Understanding that there may be limits as to how much you can say in an open hearing, what can you tell us how CBP is using these funds? And also with regards to the FY16 budget request for $14.7 million for NTC's counter-network capability, how would these additional funds be used to further develop counter-network operations?
Yeah, the feedback from our people at the targeting center is that they were unbelievably appreciative of your visit and your willingness to learn and understand what they were doing. And the targeting center for passengers and cargo has been in existence for a while, but we really didn't have that comprehensive look at the targeting use of a targeting center with multiple agencies to go after smuggling networks. So we can arrest the same 15 or 16-year-old 18 or 20 or more times for smuggling human beings across the border in Mexico. But the key is not to go after that 16-year-old who's doing it. The key is to go after that network. And so whether it's people like General McChrystal and Lieutenant General Flynn, when they looked at, in order to break a network, you have to counter a network. All of this is based upon then technology and information. So being able to transmit information to our federal counterparts and not have to do it on a phone call, but rather to do it instantaneously and through a pipe, those are the kinds of things that money is being spent on. There's also some really good private sector organizations that have been dealing with this and have been giving us some of this information. And all of this, I think, really will go to support the Secretary's Southern Border and Approaches campaign, which is to knit together the Coast Guard, ICE, and CBP to go after the networks and to break the backs of these smuggling chains.
Also, the FY15 report emphasized the importance of reducing and preventing the deaths of migrants crossing the southwest border in remote and inhospitable areas. Have advancements in situational awareness in the geospatial intelligence areas of the border also improved your ability to detect in distress in order to more quickly provide assistance And is the Border Patrol working with civil society organizations to help reduce migrant deaths?
I've been in a number of those meetings with the Border Patrol and those non-governmental organizations that provide the beacons or the alerts. I've met with a number and actually got to recognize and appreciate the work that our Border Patrol rescue people do. Star, they're tremendously helpful. The number of rescues and people, and I don't think there's not more than 4 or 5 hours that go by that I don't get some message on the BlackBerry about the work that they're doing. I think that we continue, and I meet regularly with these non-governmental organizations to make sure that crossing that border is incredibly dangerous. We have to give that message out repeatedly in a variety of ways, but people are still going to come to this country the same way and for the same reasons that lots of other people want to come to the country: safety and security and economics and education opportunities for their children. And so they're going to make that dangerous journey. There shouldn't be a death penalty involved in attempting to make that journey. And the Border Patrol agents and the NGOs and the people that I know and I've worked with are just as committed to saving life as to us enforcing the law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've run out of time, but the unity of effort that Secretary Johnson proposed in 14, it's something that I had a conversation with him early on when he came on board, and I support wholeheartedly. I think it's a great use of resources. And I'm assuming that CBP fits right in the middle of that package.
That joint task force
Yeah.
between Texas and California is headed by Robert Harris from the Border Patrol.
And I guess cutting through all these other questions, because I just want to get down, as you look forward on this stuff, because I think it's going to be a good utilization of resources. I've always wondered why you only have limited air resources and you've got a surge coming. You really need more planes. If there's a Coast Guard station right down the road, why can't they send you some folks up there to help you? We're all part of one department. And so I'm very supportive of this. As you look down the road and then as we move along, what other spending issues might be coming up as working with joint task forces that come to your mind? Share that information with us, because we're going to be looking down the road at this joint task force work that's going to happen. I'm sure there's going to be some costs involved. Some of it will be shared between the agencies, but some of it we'll have to come up with. And so we'd love to have your ideas, because you're an important part of our decision-making. That's all. Thank you very much. It's been a very good hearing, and we've enjoyed being with you. And we'll adjourn this one and get ready for the next one.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.